I talked about some of the different causes of language change. Now I'd like to talk about some of the different kinds of language change. What are some of the different types of changes we could expect? Reading Beowulf in Old English, or even reading Shakespeare, is enough to remind us that languages change over time. The English in those texts is different from the English most of us speak today. English has changed in terms of how it sounds, in terms of how the words and the syntax work, and in what many of the words mean. These four kinds of language change are phonological change, morphological change, syntactic change, and semantic change. So phonological change, changes in how the language sounds. Morphological change and syntactic change, change in the way the words or the syntax works in the language. And semantic change involves changes in what the words mean. Now, phonological change is any change in the sound system of a language, particularly in its phonemes and their distribution. So now here's the definition of morphological change. Any change in the morphophonemic systems, the morphemes and their phonemic representation of a language. That is to say, morphological change is any change in the morphemes or the sounds in the morphemes in a language. And by syntactic change, we're talking about a change in the grammatical system. One example of a syntactic change would have been the loss of case markers between Old English and English today. Old English had affixes on the words that would tell you whether they were a subject or an object, and knowing this, word order didn't need to do the same job. English today doesn't rely on case marking. As we've lost this case marking, though, the word order has become progressively more fixed. So that would be a syntactic change, the losing of case marking and the gaining of a more fixed word order. Knowing what semantics are, you know what semantic change would be then. Shukla and Connor Linton define semantic change like this. Semantic change is mainly concerned with changes in the meanings of words. These changes are usually incremental and can be traced historically. So let's have some examples of different kinds of semantic change. Broadening is when the range of meanings increase. For example, these days I can hear the word random being used not to mean just by chance, but that was unexpected. So that would be an example of broadening. The range of meanings of this word have increased. With metonymy, a word takes on the meaning of an entire domain. For example, the press doesn't just include the printing press, but the entire industry around the printing press. And these days includes people who are not even involved in printing at all, like telecommunications companies. And so this is an example of metonymy, where a word takes on the meaning of the entire domain. Another kind of semantic change is narrowing. In this kind of semantic change, the range of meanings of a word narrow. The Old English hunt becomes the modern English hound. So the Old English term for dog became the modern English term for a specific kind of dog. The meaning of the word hound narrowed from dog to specific kind of dog. Sometimes the meaning of a word changes in that over time it comes to take on a more negative or pejorative value. The word retarded is an example. The word retarded wasn't originally a pejorative assessment, but now it can be used quite insensitively as an insult. A word that had a fairly neutral value came on over time to have a pejorative one. And you can probably think of other words where the meaning over time has become more pejorative. For example, the word spinster, meaning one who spins, now takes upon the negative meaning of an old unmarried woman. Now, amelioration is the opposite process. over time, a word takes on a more positive meaning. A negative word a negative or a neutral word comes to take on a more positive meaning. For example, the word wicked, meaning great. And then there's semantic change through metaphor. And semantic change through metaphor is when the meaning of one word changes towards a more metaphorical meaning. The word is used in a metaphorical way, and over time that becomes part of the meaning of the word. For example, petrified meant to be turned to stone. So people said, I'm petrified, metaphorically to mean I'm scared, and over time, being scared became part of the meaning of the term. You may not, eventually you won't even think of the metaphor when you think of the word. The meaning of the word simply becomes that. You don't actually think of being turned to stone when someone says, I was petrified. So to review, the 4 kinds of language change are phonological change, morphological change, syntactic change, and semantic change. And then we talked about several different types of semantic change.